So, have you ever stopped to think, what if some of the biggest problems we face, like resource scarcity, maybe even health issues, what if they aren't just natural limits? Not just unfortunate realities. What if they're actually designed? It's a pretty bold claim, I realize.
Okay.
But today, we're going to dive deep into a really compelling source that it challenges our fundamental assumptions.
It definitely does. It's a radical perspective.
Yeah, and we're exploring this idea that scarcity, dependency, they're not always organic. Sometimes they might be deliberately engineered by powerful forces, across industry, science,
Yeah.
even war.
Exactly.
So our mission in this deep dive is to pull out the most impactful insights from this material, to understand how these systems, well, how they might be intentionally built to consolidate power and control. And crucially, what that means for you listening right now.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is how the source frames scarcity. It's not treated as some immutable law of nature. Instead, it's presented as a strategic narrative. It makes you ask, okay, who benefits when these limits are declared? So yeah, we'll explore the why it matters behind these engineered systems and hopefully encourage you to question, the default settings of the world around you, to look beyond the surface.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the first core idea our source really gets into. Something he calls the petroleum myth. I mean, for decades, we've heard the story of fossil fuels, right?
It's deeply ingrained.
And the term itself seems designed to make us feel like oil's limited,
Yeah.
fragile, something we're going to run out of any minute.
Yeah.
The whole ancient forest, dead dinosaurs thing.
Yeah.
A finite resource.
Right, the scarcity narrative built right in.
But here's where it gets, well, really interesting. The source brings up this counter-narrative, abiotic oil research. For someone maybe hearing this for the first time, what's the basic idea behind abiotic oil?
Yeah.
And why was it seen as such a threat?
That's a great question. So the theory, and this came largely from Russian and Ukrainian geologists back in the 20th century, it suggests oil isn't actually formed from biological stuff, not from fossils. Instead, the idea is that hydrocarbons are produced deep inside the earth, down in the mantle, through geological processes, and it's potentially a constantly regenerating resource that kind of seeps up towards the surface.
Wow, okay, so not a fixed pool of dead things, but something the earth itself keeps making.
Exactly. Imagine like a practically limitless supply reforming over geological time. It completely changes the game from a finite resource perspective.
And the reaction from, say, the Western world to this pretty radical idea.
Well, according to the source, global dismissal, especially in academia, energy markets over here, it was largely ignored or actively suppressed.
It seems hard to just ignore a scientific theory like that, though.
Well, think about the strategic implications. If oil is abundant, if it is regenerating, and if alternatives were viable and known, well, entire empires built on petrochemical dependency start to look a bit shaky, don't they? Okay, so the scarcity story wasn't just science, it was useful.
That's the argument. This perspective highlights that the myth, the story of biological scarcity, served a purpose. It justified higher prices, it fueled wars over territory because resources seemed finite and precious, and crucially, it helped suppress alternative fuels that might have challenged oil's dominance. The source puts it very bluntly. Scarcity wasn't science. It was a story told by sellers.
That's a powerful line. But what about the geological evidence most of us learned in school for fossil fuels? How does this material tackle that? Does it just throw it all out?
Not entirely. It doesn't dismiss the existence of oil or even the conventional geology, but it questions the origin story and critically the motives behind promoting that specific story so heavily. The author points to evidence that quietly contradicted the fossil narrative, evidence often suppressed or just not widely reported.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, things like deep drill wells that kept producing oil for years, even decades, after they were predicted to run dry based on the fossil fuel model.
Or finding hydrocarbon signatures, the chemical markers of oil, miles deep in the Earth's crust, where life, as we know it, couldn't possibly have existed to form fossils.
Right, that doesn't fit the standard picture at all.
Exactly. And then there were practical, reusable synthetic fuels developed during wartime when oil supply lines were cut. Those technologies existed.
And those suggest those were buried.
Buried, patents bought up, discoveries discredited, if they threaten the existing profit structure. The argument is pretty stark. The truth wasn't profitable. The illusion was.
And it wasn't just about the fuel for our cars, was it? This connects to petrochemicals, too.
Absolutely. That's a key part of this scarcity by design idea. Oil's byproducts, the stuff left over after refining. Petrochemicals. They flooded into medicine, cosmetics, packaging, agriculture, everywhere.
So the residue, the leftovers, became a whole new source of dependence.
Precisely. Turning waste into a new market, it created these vast interlocking dependencies. So the scarcity myth wasn't just about pricing energy. It shaped how science was funded, which alternatives got sidelined. Because the myth was useful, not necessarily because it was the complete truth.
Okay, so a really crucial insight for you, the listener, to take away here is when limits are branded as just nature, it's worth asking who benefits from that few.
Right. Engineered scarcity, the source suggests, is fundamentally about control.
Okay, that idea of engineered scarcity really makes you think, especially about things we rely on every day, like our food. And the source shifts gears here pretty dramatically, arguing our agriculture system isn't just modified. It's been, quote, weaponized, creating another dependency path. So let's dig into this section, from farm to pharma.
It's a provocative term, weaponized, but the argument laid out is quite detailed. Traditional farming often had this seasonal, almost spiritual connection for communities, often very local, very sovereign.
Right.
The source argues that shifted massively with petrochemical fertilizers, pesticides, monoculture farming.
Monoculture meaning just growing one single crop over huge areas.
Exactly. That, plus science driven by subsidies, not necessarily just soil health or nutrition. The whole system, from the seed you plant to the food on your plate and, often, disturbingly, to the pharmacy. It seems engineered for dependence, for profit derived from that dependence.
And it starts right at the beginning with the seeds. Seeds of control, the source calls it. We were told GMO crops would bring abundance, feed the world.
Which sounds great on the surface.
But the source says what they really delivered was like patent enforcement on life itself. How does that work?
Well, think about seed contracts that legally forbid farmers from saving and replanting their own seeds from their harvests.
So they have to buy new seeds every single year.
Every year,
Yeah,
from the
right.
company. Or herbicide-resistant seeds, designed specifically to require that company's specific herbicide. It's a package deal. Dependency by design. Precisely. And these huge agri-tech firms lobbied hard globally for trade rules that favored this model, always under the banner of feeding the world. But the outcome, according to this material, a massive power shift, the source says. Farmers became renters, food became formula, sovereignty was overwritten by supply chains, and the punchline, your plate is programmed.
Wow. Your plate is programmed.
That's
You Yeah, and if your plate is programmed, that leads right into the next piece, the pharmaceutical loop.
Yeah.
The source suggests nutrition isn't the main goal here, but creating, maybe even sustaining symptom cycles is. Can you unpack that connection?
It's a really disturbing potential feedback loop that's described. For example, think about highly processed grains that can cause blood sugar spikes, right?
Yeah, it leads to insulin resistance for some people.
Which then potentially increases the need for diabetes medications. Or consider chemical preservatives in food disrupting our gut microbiome.
Leading to digestive issues.
And then suddenly there's a booming market for probiotic supplements or other gut health drugs.
Okay, I see the loop.
Or even plastic packaging chemicals leaching into food, potentially disrupting hormones, creating a downstream demand for endocrine therapies.
And the source suggests these aren't always separate industries.
That's the really alarming point. Often, the companies producing the processed foods or the packaging might be sister companies or under the same parent corporation as the pharmaceutical companies selling the treatments for the conditions potentially exacerbated by those products.
So health becomes less about wellness and more like a subscription.
That's the implication. A recurring revenue model built on managing symptoms, potentially symptoms linked back to the engineered food system itself.
And data plays a role too. Data-driven dependency.
Absolutely. It's not just about altering genes anymore. Ag tech tracks everything. Farm inputs are tracked, yields are predicted by algorithms, which then influence subsidies. Your dietary data, collected through apps or purchases, fuels new product development.
So we become the test subjects.
In a way, rural communities might become testing grounds for certain agricultural practices or even related health interventions. The source argues quite strongly, food and pharma merged and the customer became the case study. It's a fundamental shift in the relationship.
It really makes you question. When nourishment seems engineered for recurrence, not resolution, does health stop being a state of being and just become a service you pay for over and over?
That's the profound question it leaves you with. It's a challenging thought.
Yeah, it really is. And that idea of systems designed for recurrence, it connects directly to another major theme in the source material. how innovations from war become sort of permanent fixtures in our lives. This section is called War's Unseen Harvest. The idea is that war isn't only destruction, it's also this intense, maybe dark catalyst for innovation.
Right, a crucible for invention under extreme pressure.
And these battlefield inventions, they don't just stay on the battlefield, they find their way into civilian life. And often, profit follows that initial trauma. Just think about some examples, right? Penicillin, industrialized during World War II. A lifesaver, absolutely. But then it became an everyday prescription.
A miracle drug becomes a commodity.
Exactly. Or plastic packaging, scaled up massively for military supplies, keeping things sterile and transportable.
Vital for logistics, then.
And now, it wraps practically everything we buy. Or radar and microwave tech.
From spotting planes to heating leftovers.
Right. It mutated into consumer electronics, even chemical preservatives developed to make military rations last longer.
Now they're in so much processed food on supermarket shelves.
It's like every explosion sends ripples outwards, and every battlefield fix becomes a blueprint for something sold back to us later.
And the deeper implication the source explores here is really quite profound. It argues, and this is a direct quote, they don't end wars, they domesticate them.
Domesticate them. What does that mean?
It introduces this concept of the trauma economy. The idea is that large-scale suffering, like from a war, isn't just a tragic consequence. It can be systematically analyzed, processed, and converted into new markets, new supply chains.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, think about veterans returning home, often dealing with immense challenges: PTSD, addiction, chronic physical illnesses from injuries or exposures.
Like huge societal cost.
But the source argues that pharmaceutical industries didn't just spring up to treat these issues. Sometimes they inadvertently, or maybe purposefully, created new dependencies. Pain management protocols, desperately needed initially, sometimes evolved into pipelines for opioid addiction. Antidepressants were developed building on wartime neurology experiments. Even things like disability compensation systems, while necessary for support, could unintentionally create long-term dependency, turning veterans into lifelong consumers of certain services or medications. The public narrative is always support the troops, which is right, but the source suggests that behind the scenes, their struggles were sometimes quietly converted into very profitable long-term revenue streams.
That feels like a kind of strategic recycling, as the
Yeah.
source puts it. Nothing is wasted. Not the trauma, not the tech developed to inflict or manage it.
Not even the theories. Think about battlefield algorithms developed for drone targeting or mapping enemy behavior patterns.
Yeah.
The source argues those very algorithms were retooled, repurposed for targeted advertising, for civilian surveillance systems, for predictive analytics trying to figure out what you'll buy or do next.
So the boon from the war economy never really stops. It just changes form and moves into the civilian sector.
That's the disturbing implication. It suggests the conflict mindset, the tech, the control mechanisms, they just get repackaged for peacetime use.
So it raises a critical question for us and for you listening. If a product or a technology is born out of conflict, and then it's marketed to us as comfort or convenience,
What does that tell you about its underlying motive? The origin story often reveals the deeper intent, doesn't it?
that really makes me think about control in a broader sense, how entire industries seem to consolidate power. Which brings us to the next section, monopoly by design. The core argument here is that monopolies aren't usually accidents of the market. They're often engineered outcomes.
Right. Deliberately constructed.
Every pipeline, every patent, every government policy, the source suggests they're often optimized to create consolidation. Fewer players, more dependence for the rest of us, and crucially, fewer real alternatives available.
It frames it as a question: industry or empire? Are these just businesses competing, or are they building empires of control?
And you see it across sectors, right? Oil, agriculture, telecoms, pharma.
Mhm.
These monopolistic or oligopolistic structures, they aren't just tolerated. The source argues they're actively incentivized through things like what the source calls regulatory capture. This is where powerful corporations gain so much influence over the government agencies meant to regulate them.
That they end up essentially writing their own rules.
Exactly. Or lobbying for loopholes that protect their dominance. Think about the food supply narrowing down to just a handful of giant agrochemical companies.
Or energy grids controlled by vertically integrated fossil fuel firms, from wellhead to outlet.
Or intellectual property patents, licenses being controlled by these tight rings that block out competition.
So the insight is, control isn't necessarily about owning everything.
No, it's about owning what's critical, the bottlenecks, the essential infrastructure.
And that leads to this idea that choice becomes illusion when access is rigged, which connects directly to patents, doesn't it? Patents as power.
Yeah, the source argues corporations build these patent walls, these silos, not just to protect their own inventions.
But often to actively prevent alternatives from ever emerging, or to control them if they do.
Right. Breakthrough tech gets bought up and shelved, buried. Generic drugs face years of legal battles to delay their entry.
Even open source innovation, which starts out collaborative,
Can get co-opted, absorbed, and monetized by the very giants it was trying to offer an alternative to.
so the claim is pretty bold. Monopolies don't innovate, they acquire, absorb, and silence.
And sometimes what looks like choice isn't choice at all. It's what the material calls controlled diversity.
Meaning,
Meaning you walk down the supermarket aisle, you see maybe a dozen different brands of shampoo. Looks like lots of competition.
but they might all be owned by one or two parent companies.
Exactly. Or you have several different energy providers to choose from in your area.
But they're all buying their power from the exact same fossil fuel pipeline or generating plant controlled by a single entity further up the chain.
So the variety we see is just camouflage. A parade of logos hiding the real concentration of power. Dependency deepens behind that illusion.
So maybe a strategic insight for you listening. When diversity seems really loud and obvious, it's worth tracing the silence. Who actually owns things?
Yeah, follow the money, follow the ownership. It often tells a very different story about who's really in control.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of controlling critical inputs, it extends right down to the raw materials of our world. Metals. Let's unpack this section. Iron and alchemy. We know empires are built on metal, right? Iron for rails, steel for weapons, aluminum for planes.
The backbone of industry and military might.
But the story suggests that beneath that industrial surface, there's a deeper kind of alchemy going on, one involving manipulation, orchestration. It says minerals carry meaning, and mining itself becomes a form of manipulation.
How does that play out?
We'll take minerals as monopoly. Think about rare earth metals, lithium, cobalt, palladium, tungsten. These went from being just obscure rocks in the ground.
To being critical political chess pieces.
Exactly. Because control over these specific resources now dictates who leads in tech innovation, military capability. Lithium for batteries in EVs and phones, cobalt for high-performance alloys, palladium in catalysts, tungsten in advanced weaponry.
So whoever controls the supply controls the future, in a way.
And the narrative around their rarity.
Yeah.
The source suggests that's often deliberately amplified. To inflate market prices, sure, but also to justify occupations, resource nationalism, strategic alliances.
Which connects back to that powerful quote you mentioned. Scarcity is the excuse. Control is the motive.
It fits perfectly here. And this leads to alchemy in the lab. The source argues that what used to be, mystical alchemy transforming elements is now happening in advanced labs, and it's often militarized.
Like creating new material.
Exactly. Synthetic metals with specific properties for aerospace, nanomaterials designed for surveillance applications. There's even talk of things like smart dust, microscopic sensors, biometal coatings, traceable polymers woven into materials.
So alchemy didn't disappear, it just put on a lab coat and maybe a uniform?
That's the idea. The transformation of matter into meaning, into control. It's now a highly sophisticated global supply chain.
And if one nation challenges the control over extraction or processing,
Sanctions often follow. Tech tariffs. Deepen dependency on the dominant players. It's all leverage.
which sounds a lot like strategic scarcity.
Precisely. The source says strategic minerals are named that way for their leverage, not just their natural rarity.
So the label itself is part of the strategy.
Right. And this drives resource nationalism, proxy conflicts funded by outside powers vying for access, corporate stockpiling that distorts actual global availability.
Even weaponized environmental regulations, how would that work?
Well, imagine using strict environmental rules, which sound good, primarily as a tool to block a competitor's mining project or to control access to resources in a specific region under the guise of conservation.
Okay, yeah, that's a cynical but plausible mechanism. Metal becomes a metaphor for power, controlled through these complex means.
It really encourages a deeper look, doesn't it, for you listening? When you see metals shaping the news, shaping wars, shaping technology, look beyond the ore itself. Look into the orchestration.
Yeah, the visible supply chain might just be hiding the invisible hand pulling the strings.
And all this discussion of engineered control, engineered scarcity, it brings us to a really chilling concept the source outlines, the doom loop.
The doom loop sounds ominous.
It is. The idea is that scarcity isn't just created, it's programmed into a repeating cycle. The system isn't meant to collapse accidentally. It's designed to loop.
How does the loop work?
Every disaster, every crisis, whether it's war, inflation, climate change, a pandemic, it becomes the justification for implementing solutions that actually deepen our dependency on the very systems or powers that benefit from the crisis.
So crisis drives consolidation, and consolidation breeds more control, which sets up the next crisis.
Exactly. It feeds itself. War, inflation, climate panic, health scares. The source argues each one feeds the loop, pushing us towards more centralized control, less individual agency.
We see this pattern of crisis as catalysts described everywhere in the source.
Yeah, it claims that almost every major unforeseen catastrophe seems to arrive with prepackaged solutions already waiting. Solutions that just happen to benefit the institutions that gain the most power or profit from them.
Give me some examples from the source.
Okay, so
Right.
a climate emergency leads to proposals for carbon markets controlled by financial institutions or geoengineering patents held by corporations.
Right.
A global pandemic leads to calls for mass medical surveillance systems and generates huge profit surges for specific pharmaceutical and tech companies. Inflation leads to pushes for central bank digital currencies, increasing financial centralization. Cyber attacks justify a more militarized internet, more surveillance, more predictive policing.
And the common thread in the response is?
Never decentralization. Never empowering local communities or individuals. It's always more containment, more consolidation, more top-down control. And every fix just tightens the loop for the next cycle.
And the truly chilling observation here, one of the core insights, I think, is that, quote, they don't break the loop, they automate it.
Automate it.
Through what the source calls behavioral engineering, using the loop itself to shape how we think and react.
Okay, explain that.
Fear, constant exposure to crisis normalizes the acceptance of more control. Scarcity, real or perceived, fuels competition between individuals, preventing solidarity. Complexity, the sheer tangled nature of these global systems, hides accountability. Who's really responsible? It's hard to pin down.
So crisis stops being an event and just becomes culture, a constant state we live in.
Exactly. And eventually, exhaustion sets in. Just dealing with the day-to-day struggle makes people more likely to comply, to accept the engineered solutions because fighting them seems too hard.
You're not just reacting to emergencies anymore. You're conditioned to expect them.
And to accept the solutions offered by the authorities or corporations as the only viable path forward.
And this doom loop demonstrates what the source calls loop-proof power, because it seems to self-replicate across different sectors.
How does that work? Can you give an example of it crossing sectors?
Sure. Think about fossil fuels. Their use contributes to climate change, creating an energy panic. The proposed solution, often large-scale renewables.
Which sounds good.
But they often rely heavily on those same strategic minerals controlled by mining monopolies we just talked about, creating a new dependency loop. Or the pharma industry creates reliance on certain drugs, leading to health panics when supply chains break or side effects emerge.
Which then justifies calls for even more centralized control over health data and treatments.
Right. Or issues in the industrial food system contribute to climate panic.
Leading to pushes for lab-grown meat or other tech-heavy food solutions, often controlled by the same handful of corporations, creating another dependency.
It's insidious. The source even suggests that sometimes resistance itself gets co-opted and monetized, absorbed back into the system without fundamentally changing it. The loop adapts, absorbs, rebrands itself.
It really forces us to ask a tough question when we observe world events. When seemingly every emergency ends up enriching or empowering the already powerful, who really profits from the panic?
Yeah, look past the immediate crisis to the underlying beneficiaries.
So pulling all these threads together, what's the bottom line here? The source seems to be challenging the whole idea that progress is just this natural, inevitable, benevolent force, right?
Exactly. It argues that behind innovation, there's investment. And behind investment, there's usually an agenda. The future isn't just unfolding, it's being actively funded and shaped.
And the funders have a huge say in which direction society goes.
Which brings us to the final piece we need to touch on, philanthropy or control.
The role of big foundations, NGOs, impact investors.
Right. These organizations often promise solutions, promise social good, progress.
But the source suggests that what they sometimes deliver is actually a form of soft power, more subtle control.
Can you elaborate on what soft power means in this context?
Sure. It's influence wielded not through force, like military power, but through cultural, economic, and ideological means. The source points to examples like Research grants from major foundations that tend to favor projects aligning with a certain narrative or worldview, effectively steering the course of academic research.
Oh, yeah.
Tech accelerators, funded by venture capital or foundations, that prioritize scalable surveillance technologies or platforms that centralize data over maybe more decentralized or community-focused tech.
Right.
Health initiatives in developing nations that, while providing some aid, might also mask resource extraction activities by affiliated corporations or create long-term dependency on Western medical supplies or expertise.
Hmm.
And even education funding that comes with ideological strings attached, shaping curriculum or promoting certain economic models. So the source concludes in this view, philanthropy becomes strategy, progress becomes, and the source kind of trailed off there, implying progress becomes controlled, managed, directed, rather than truly organic or liberating.
Okay, so let's try to wrap up this deep dive. The core message, weaving through all these examples from our source material, is pretty clear, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems to be that scarcity, whether it's resources, health, choice, even safety, isn't always just a natural state of affairs.
It can be, and the source argues often is engineered, deliberately constructed to create and then reinforce dependency.
And we've seen how the material suggests these systems are built across energy, with the petroleum myth,
Across health and food with the farm-to-pharma loop,
across technology and materials, with strategic metals and recycled war tech.
and even in the cycles of crisis and response through the doom loop, all based on the insights from this really provocative source.
And I think if we connect this to the bigger picture for you listening, simply recognizing these potential patterns, learning to question the narratives you're presented with, that's really the crucial first step
Towards what?
towards agency, towards maybe reclaiming some autonomy, understanding how this engineered world might operate, paradoxically, could be one of the most liberating things you can do.
Our source actually ends with a really powerful thought. It says, awakening begins where automation ends.
Where the programmed responses stop.
Exactly. So maybe we leave you with some questions to mull over, drawn from everything we've discussed. Is scarcity truly a fundamental law of nature in every case? Or is it sometimes a narrative you've been sold?
Is the convenience offered by some systems genuinely worth the potential captivity that comes with dependency on them?
Are the choices you make every day truly yours? Or are they sometimes market simulations designed to give you the feeling of choice while limiting the actual options?
The source suggests that when you start to interrogate the source of your dependencies, where your energy really comes from, how your food is truly made, who profits from your data or your health issues.
That's where you find the seed of liberation. That's where the awakening begins.